Ja się nazywam Katarzyna Iwińska I bardzo się cieszę, że
Good morning, my name is Katarzyna Iwińska. I'm really glad that so many of you came to this seminar.
Otwarcie platformy YouVote.eu.
We've got this new platform, EU Vote EU. Thank you for coming. Thank you. I would also like to extend our thanks to the Creative Center of Prague for hosting this event. I would like to officially thank ECFR and the organizers of World in Focus. We would like to invite you to the opening of the seminar at 3 p.m. today. The seminar is going to last today and tomorrow. Collegium Civitas, along with 4 NGOs, are engaged with the YouVote.EU project, which regards European parliamentary elections in 2019. There is still a year to go before the elections. We've got Miss Priscilla Robledo, who is going to present the platform. Applause for her. She's the leader of the project. We also have a series of panelists, both women and men, just one man, which is kind of exceptional. Usually there are more men than women as panelists. I'm really sorry on behalf of Lena Kolarska. She called me today. No, she called Grzegorz today at 6 a.m. in the morning. She said she's not feeling well. Weather is changing very much in Poland at present, so that might be the reason. Fortunately, Miss Cianciara agreed to substitute Ms. Lena Kolarska. Let me now give the floor to Grzegorz, who will introduce our panelists. Some housekeeping rules. The discussion will take place in Polish, but we've got a representative from Great Britain, Kerry Longhurst. She will speak English. So if you do not understand English, please use headsets which are available for you. There will be simultaneous interpretation into English and Polish. Let me now tell you who I am. My name is Grzegorz Makowski. I work for Batory Foundation, and also I'm an assistant at Collegium Civitas. I'm really glad to be able to join my different perspectives and professions during this event. And now let me tell you a couple of words about the purpose of this seminar. We are trying to launch as many initiatives as possible to encourage Poles, but not only Poles, but all Europeans to take part in elections, to get interested in politics. It seems that the upcoming election will be kind of exceptional when compared to the previous ones. And now let's move to the panel itself. First, we would like to talk about why it is important to worry about the state of affairs in Europe, how to mobilize voters. This discussion is being recorded and we are going to use it later on to launch some initiatives and projects. And then we'll present this tool that might help politicians and European institutions to increase voter turnout. First, I would like to ask Ms. Cianciara to introduce this panel, and then I'll give the floor to the next panelists. to share the knowledge with us. Professor is also not feeling very well today, but she's not failed us. She's with us today. Thank you, Grzegorz. My name is Agnieszka Cianciara. I work at the Institute of Political Studies of the Polish Academy of Science. Well, today at 7 a.m. I had the pleasure to introduce this event. Of course, it's not possible for me to replace Ms. Kolarska-Bobińska, also because of the fact that I have never been an MEP, unlike Ms. Lena Kolarska-Bobińska. I'm a researcher who has been to the European Parliament many times, but this cannot equal 5 years of experience within the Parliament as a member of the Parliament. When I was going to this place today evening, I was wondering what I could tell you. And I thought that maybe I should talk about anniversaries. Why? Well, when in spring next year we will take part in European elections, this will be the 40th anniversary of the first vote held when it comes to European Parliament elections in 1979. This is a great opportunity to think about, first of all, it was as late as 1979 or as early as 1979 that the Europeans were able to vote for members of the European Parliament, and we could also think about what the elections looked like during the past 40 years. But of course we need to focus on voter turnout, which is the crucial point for today. So, first of all, why 1979? And where did the idea come from for citizens of Europe to take part in direct elections? The majority of European organizations, institutions have a kind of parliamentary assembly, but usually the members of such an assembly are MPs chosen, selected directly in the national countries and then appointed to the international body. And that's what it looked like until 1979, when everything changed, because it turned out that it was the citizens who were to directly appoint members of the European Parliament. Let me stress, full-time members of the European Parliament, so they are not split between national parliaments and the European Parliament. Why 1979? Well, this was a long-term process. It was as early as in the 1950s, when we had the European Steel and Coal Community. The Parliamentary Assembly was established, and its members were members of national parliaments, which were appointed to represent their states, respective states, in the international organizations. But there was a possibility provided for that special elections could be held to appoint members directly, but none of the countries used this opportunity. Then, after the treaties of Rome, a working group was created. In 1960, it presented a report concerning what the direct elections to the European Parliament should look like, but this report was put aside and people came back to it as late as in 1969. Why is it the case? Well, as you might remember, 1960s were times of great crisis, which resulted in what we called crisis of empty chair. there was tensions between France of Charles de Gaulle and the European Commission. What was it about? Well, the tensions were about the fact that France thought that the president of the European Commission exceeds its competences, its powers, which is a threat for the entire Europe. But others claimed that they do not exceed their powers. They use the powers provided for by the treaties. As a result of this conflict between a given state, in this case France, and the international organization, in this case European Parliament, led the situation where changes were needed. We needed a new form of parliament, but no one wanted more conflicts. As a result, in 1960s, it was impossible to introduce direct elections to the European Parliament. Then General de Gaulle retreated, and in 1975, decision was taken to change the rules, but it was also a long-term process. There was lots of pressure from the members of the European Parliament, delegated by national parliaments. They wanted to introduce direct elections because they knew this would strengthen the position of the European Parliament. At that time, Council was very reluctant, and it took a long time to convince the Council to change its mind. Finally, the European Parliament threatened the Council and said, well, direct election results from the treaties of Rome. So if the Council does not change its mind, the Parliament would go to the Court of Justice of the European Union. So finally, the decision was taken, but again, it took a long time to implement it. But as a result of this decision, in 1979 saw the first direct elections to the European Parliament, in which 9 member states of the European Parliament took part. This was after the first enlargement of the European Union. Among others, Great Britain joined the EU at that time. And now, during the first vote in 1979, voter turnout was approximately 62%. Currently, in 2014, it was 42.6%. In 1979, the turnout of 62%, the average for 9 countries, was regarded as really low. And now 42.6% is regarded as really, really low. Of course, also, both back in 79 and in 2014, the turnout varies from state to state. The highest turnout is in Belgium, because voting is mandatory there, and probably because of the fact that Belgium has this proximity of the parliament, geographical proximity. So the highest turnout is in Belgium. In the UK, it is one of the lowest, approximately 30%. Well, Eurosceptics often claim that the European Parliament elections are characterized by very low turnout and that it is dropping steadily, despite the fact that the competences of the European Parliament are increasing all the time. Comparing to the situation back in 1979, the Parliament has much more powers now. In the past, the other bodies of the European Union needed to ask the Parliament for an opinion on a given document or a given situation, but they did not have to take into account what the Parliament said. Then, over the course of time, it was becoming much more difficult not to take into account the decisions of the opinions of the European Parliament. Changes regarding voter turnout are related to two issues. It is very often pointed out that since 2004, so after the accession of the countries from our region, where turnout is lower in general. When we have a look at the last election in 2014, where the average turnout was over 42%, the turnout below 40% could be observed in 13 countries, 9 of them in our region. All the countries of the region, apart from Estonia and Latvia, had voter turnout lower than 40%. And Estonia and Latvia are closer to Scandinavia than to our region. And there is one more fundamental issue that is often missing when we talk about elections at the European level. We tend to focus on low turnout, on the fact that voters do not feel involved. European Parliament is located somewhere far away. People care about national elections and not about the elections to the European Parliament. We will discuss that later on. But what's key is the fact that turnover is dropping at the European level, but it is dropping also when it comes to elections to national parliaments in all the countries. In the so-called old democracies, voter turnout in parliamentary elections at national level is also dropping steadily when compared to the 1960s or 1970s. And when we have this perspective of 40 years, when we have a look at this drop in turnout and we compare the drop in turnout at national level and European level, it turns out that there is still a difference between the national level and European level. It is approximately 15–30%, somewhere between these two values. From 15 to 30 percentage points, with some exceptions. For instance, in Great Britain, this used to be, I'm saying used to be because probably Great Britain will never take part in European elections. This difference was a bit bigger. When it comes to our region, Poland, Slovakia, Czech, it is also a bit more. But when it comes to Poland, well, we tend to say that the turnout in parliamentary elections is really low. It was the third worst result in the last elections, but in general in Poland turnout is low also in elections to the national parliament. That's why we fit in this range of 15 to 30 percentage points, which brings me to three conclusions. The first one is as follows. Elections to the European Parliament are treated in Poland as something we should take for granted. Another duty, we have to go to the ballot station and vote for the same people from the same parties, political parties. But if we take a longer-term perspective, it turns out that's not a standard, that's not something we should take for granted. It is a great privilege which does not happen in the case of the majority of international institutions, even if they don't have such an important role as the European Parliament. The second conclusion, well, there is a problem of mandate of European institutions, and we should not forget that the same problems with turnout affect also national parliaments. So there is a general problem of legitimization of democracy and involvement of citizens in voting. It affects both the national scale and the European scale. As a result, and this brings me to the third conclusion, we should not treat these two problems separately. We should not think about mobilizing people to vote for members of the European Parliament and separately to vote people, to make people vote in elections to the European Parliament, but we should rather think about how to solve this problem of democracy in our countries. Thank you for this introduction, Agnieszka. I think you are a decent replacement for Ms. Lena. We will get back to you. This was just an introduction, but I hope you will give us even more insight. And let's now move on to the panel, and then we'll give the floor to the participants from the room. And now I would like to ask Kelly Longhurst, who is Jean Monnet professor at Collegium Civitas, who is a specialist on international affairs, both especially Eastern Neighborhood and European Partnership, and who is a British citizen. I thought that Agnieszka would be more optimistic when it comes to Brexit, but well, no wonder she was quite pessimist.
I would try to link up the context, the nature, the style, if we can use that word, with the Brexit campaign, the results of the Brexit referendum, and where we are right now. So I'm going to try and build some kind of bridges, if you like, between the forthcoming European parliamentary election and what occurred 2 years ago and what is still occurring in terms of the so-called negotiations for Britain's departure from the European Union. And I want to somehow try to highlight some what I call cautionary tales from Brexit and what we should bear in mind as we move towards the next parliamentary elections in Europe. My first comment is that I think the widespread electorate indifference, alienation and ambivalence will find its expression in the European parliamentary elections for sure, just as it did in the Brexit vote. But let's just remind ourselves and contrast for a minute the very high level of turnout from Brexit compared to the British performance in previous European parliamentary elections. I think it was over 72% of eligible voters in the UK cast a vote in the Brexit referendum. Whereas over the previous decades, only around 30% of Brits voted in the European elections. That isn't the lowest country, of course, but it's on the low side. So let's think about why so many people engaged in Brexit and why so many Brits, in this case, do not bother voting in the European Parliament. So how can we explain this real contrast? Well, I think first and foremost, in the Brexit vote, people really thought they had a stake. They were stakeholders in the process, whether they were voting for or whether they were voting to leave the European Union. They saw that the result mattered. They saw that they'd bring about some kind of change. And I think this really, really contrasts with the whole nature, the whole culture, the reality of European elections. Electorates, whether they're British or whatever nationality, don't really get a sense that their vote matters. There's no sense of palpable change. There's no perceived sense of a tangible result that's going to perhaps come out of bothering to vote at the European level. And this is my second point, and it's a very obvious point really, is that Brexit really demonstrated the persistence, the longevity, the dominance, the strength of national thinking. I think it showed very, very much the case that when, if I can say the average Brit, the person who isn't a Jean Monnet professor or people working in European politics, you know, their perception and understanding of European politics is strongly filtered through national media, through national actors, priorities and policies. I think very rarely are people exposed to true European issues to think about and to talk about in the media. So we have to remind ourselves of this persistence of the strong national filter on European issues, and that affects people's perceptions on what to decide whether or not they vote at the European level. And that particular situation in the UK, the dominance of national thinking about European issues, that filter it creates, I think made it very, very easy for the Leave campaigners, the Brexiteers, to present this taking back control, because it became a very, very sexy and seductive motto to convince people to vote against staying in the European Union. Whereas if we look at the European parliamentary level, we can see that there's very little, in my view, my perspective, in there being strong transnational pan-European issues for European electorates to grasp and cling on to and get excited about. I'd challenge the idea that there is a pan-EU civil society. I'd challenge the idea that there is a pan-EU electorate, in the sense that maybe we'd like to see already in 2019. And there's a lack of issues, themes, factors being conceptualized at that European level, which really I think stymies and hinders this idea of people thinking in a European way, and therefore hopefully, mobilizing them to vote. And I was kind of casting my mind back to the previous EP election about what my MEPs were campaigning on, what were the issues, and I actually can't remember. I can't remember what issues they were campaigning on, which I think again exhibits this lack of the European level of campaigning and thinking. And of course that's also represented in the structure of the European Parliament, I know that. A bit more on Brexit. We know that there were huge regional variations in terms of those who voted for staying in the EU and those who voted against. But I think the defining features, the variables that really shone out from the Brexit campaign in terms of the result was the age of voters. As we know, the vast majority of, I think it was 18 to 25-year-olds, about 75% of those wanted to stay in the EU. I mean, they were future-oriented, probably travelling gives this more open kind of perspective. Where it was the over 65s who were the dominant group in terms of voting to leave. The second important variable is education. Basically, the higher level of education people have, the more likely they were to vote to stay in the EU. If you look at the map of the EU where you see, pockets of universities, it's graduates who, tended to want to stay in the European Union. But also, of course, identity, and I'm particularly ashamed to say that it was those people who identified themselves as English who were more likely to vote to leave the EU, as opposed to being Scottish or Welsh or feeling British as opposed to kind of English. So to try and bring this together, what does Brexit tell us, and what should we perhaps think about or bear in mind when we reflect upon Brexit, when we look towards the next 6 months or so towards the European parliamentary elections? And I've got 5 kind of interrelated interim conclusions, if I may. I think what Brexit tells us, and I don't think this is maybe particular to Britain, but it shone out through Brexit, is that we have populations who are very much divided along different kind of fronts and different issues right now. And this is, I'm grabbing this from the existing literature. We have populations who are divided along the terms of themes like order versus openness. Those in society who are averse to change, and those who are more outward-facing, more open, and therefore possibly more open to thinking in European themes. And of course that's built upon different values and different experiences that people have. But Brexit really, I think, showed this openness versus order in amongst the British population. And that, of course, links to what was one of the main, I think, results or observations from Brexit, were those swathes of the British population who truly felt left behind, who felt disenfranchised by the European integration process. People with very different life 3 minutes, that's very posh, okay. Very different life experiences, very different types of expectations, which really was manifest in the Leave vote. Linked to that, and I've already mentioned it, this lack of trans-European thinking, the pan-EU civil society was palpably not present or simply not strong enough to support the country staying in the EU. The final 2 points is that, I think people make risky choices in elections. I think part of the Leave voters, it was a risky vote. They actually didn't know what they were voting for because there was no concrete plan, no proposal, no vision as to what that EU-UK relationship could be. But nevertheless, people took the risk and voted that way to protest or what have you. But that may well figure in the next European elections, I think, too. And finally, this is the final point, again, the persistence of national thinking, the lack of European-led thinking about transnational issues, I think was palpable and helps explain the Brexit vote. That's my final comment.
Thank you, and you are perfect in time. So you still have like half a minute, so. But będzie jeszcze czas.
But there will be time for each of you to say something more. And now, Jakub, voice over to you. He's a PhD student at Hertie School of Governance, where he deals with the Eurozone. And he's also an expert at the Battery Foundation, where he deals with European affairs as well. And he's running a project launched by that foundation, a project that focuses on making the European Union invest more in supporting pro-European social movements and pro-European organizations. Well, we'll see what the result will be in this regard when we see the final budget. Jakub, voice over to you. What kind of comments would you make on the narrative regarding the referendum and the elections to the European Parliament? Maybe you could be more optimistic, because we've been quite pessimistic so far. We've been making many comments on ageism, on national powers taking the lead. So what would be your comments? Maybe they will be more optimistic. Well, I'm very happy to be a man here, because at least there is one man participating in this discussion. So this is already good. This is my contribution. And as far as the voter turnout is regarded, I would like to make the following comments on the European narrative. I think this is a very important factor. Why is it so? It is the narrative that makes it possible to show what's on stake in the elections. And of course, you're able to influence the results of the elections if you focus on that narrative. And that's why I'm quite optimistic, saying that I would like not only to describe the current situation, I would also talk about how this European narrative should be changed in Poland to promote pro-European approach in our country. And I will be referring to 3 points. Point number 1, how should we not talk about the European Union? Point number 2, how should we talk about the European Union? And point 3, how should we reach the people we need to reach? Point number 1, I think the Polish narrative about the European Union has changed in 3 regards in the recent years. And this means we cannot keep talking about the European Union in the way we've been talking about it in the recent years. Why? Because the politics is back in the narrative. When we were joining the European Union, we thought that there was a consensus in Poland, that this is the right decision to join the European Union, and politics was hardly involved. It was a unanimous decision among Polish politicians to join the European Union, to promote free market. And that changed when the financial crisis came. It was a fundamental change, and the result of that financial crisis was that, again, we do not have that unanimous position among politicians. Now politicians are very much saying different things about the Polish membership of the European Union. We've got very polarized political powers. We've got the pro-European forces in the parliament saying that the European Union does not have any enemies, that it is an inclusive organization with a very good offer for everyone. whereas the narrative of the political forces which are against the European Union are very emotional. Another shift would be seeing the European Union as a threat, and this is reflected in many dimensions. Dimension number one, when we were joining the European Union, we saw the European Union as a model. We thought this is a model of stability, this is a model of welfare, this is something where we could, from where we could receive funds. Now this has changed. Many people see the European Union not as a role model, but as a source of problems. And Poland is a country that has been coping with these problems quite well. And when we take a look in the future, we see that the way the European Union is going to develop can be very bad for Poland. When you think about deepening the integration within the Eurozone only, or with regards to the energy policies concerning the coal. And many people say that Poland does not really have much impact on what is going on at the European level. Poland is often regarded as a country of only secondary importance, a second league member state. And many people are saying that we should catch up with the European Union, and this narrative is very dangerous in my opinion, because it clearly shows that we are in somehow worse than the other member states, and the fact that we are receiving so many funds, so much money from the European Union is quite humiliating for Poland, because the reason behind this is, of course, that we have a lot to catch up with the European Union. But again, we are saying that after the Brexit, the budget of the European Union might be adjusted, and we will no longer be receiving so much money from Brussels, and also Poland will be becoming richer and richer. And if we follow the European narrative of the Polish government right now, we can see that on the one hand, those politicians are saying that the European Union is only an imaginary community, and we should focus only on the hard details such as money instead of European values. And those politicians are also saying that we are not receiving so much money from Brussels. It's not just that we will not be receiving so much money in the future. They are saying we are not receiving that much money right now. And another change would be that people personally do not believe in the future. We used to have this narrative that even if I am not in such a good situation individually, I am sure that we are going in the right direction and my children will be better off. This has changed because of all the crises, the migration crisis, the financial crisis, and people start understanding that their children might not be better off in the future, that on the contrary, that the situation of the children might be worse. And we believe that the European Union will bring us a better future. But there has been a shift with regards to this opinion, and I think it will be better to say that the European Union will protect us from a worse fate in the future. So much on the issue how we should not talk about the European Union. How should we talk about the European Union now? The answer should be that we should also adopt a political narrative underlying that the European Union is party to conflicts in which Poland cannot stand alone. I will give you an example. We've got the enormous power of multinationals, and Poland as a country is not able to cope with those multinationals alone. But we can do so as a member of the European Union. Another example would be the relations with Russia or trade deals. Again, Poland is too weak itself to cope with such challenges. Another thing is that we should focus on making people understand that Poland is an important member of the European Union. We are not just catching up with the Western countries. We are on an equal footage. We are grown up as a member of the European Union, and we can indeed have a great impact on what is going on in the European Union. We just need to make use of the opportunity that we have. And of course, we should stress all the critical points, all those things which are not in the Polish interest. However, we should go further, saying that we have real impact on what is going on in Brussels, in things such as the Eurozone or the defense policy, thinking about the Polish contribution to the European Union and to the European integration, because right now Poland has not contributed so much to the development of the European integration. And this should change. And point number 3, people do not believe in a better future right now. And to answer that, we should stress that the European Union protects us from a worse future. But we need to be very specific, and we need to address that message to very specific target groups. Our membership of the European Union has contributed to the increase of the Polish GDP. This is a general message. Now, if we address farmers, for example, we can be more specific. We can talk to them about how the Polish agriculture has benefited from the membership of the European Union. We should also talk about the Polish companies that are present on European markets. We should talk about the chances regarding the labor market for young people who can move freely within member states. And now, how should we reach the right target groups? Well, we could think about education, schools, universities, the media, or maybe we could have the idea of establishing a center of political education, as it is the case in Germany. But these are long-term initiatives. They could be effective, but it just takes a lot of time. And also the pluralism is kind of limited right now in Poland, so the possibilities of using that instrument are limited as well. But there are some short-term instruments that can be used right now just before the elections to the European Parliament. First, we should focus on very specific segmentation. The research I know shows that there are 3 segments of Polish people as regards their approach to the European Union. We've got very pro-European citizens. We can of course reach that target group, but it's not that crucial because those people are already in favor of the European integration. There is another group which is very Eurosceptical, and this group is very difficult to reach, and there are people in between. That will be the third group, and it can be a very large group depending on the research. There are different results, but I think it's crucial to address those people in between, and that group should be segmented again so that we can reach all those subgroups within that group of people who are in between with the right message. Now, if you think about how information on the European Union is spread among Polish people, again, we've got very interesting results of the last Eurobarometer. There is research that shows how grown-up Poles receive information on the European Union, and 71% receive that information from TV, 39% receive that information from the internet, 36% from the press, and 26% from radio, and not so many from social media. Just 7%. And this is very important and very interesting because it shows that people who deal with European affairs and publish a lot on the social media, they think that the social media are the key as far as reaching the voters is concerned. But it turns out this is not the case, because much more people gain their information on the European Union from TV than from social media. And also we should
Jeżeli chodzi o reaktywność, to jest to, co charakteryzowało polską narrację
stress
unijną.
that the narrative, the Polish narrative about the European Union should change. If the government says something critical about the European Union, we should do the fact-checking and we should make sure that that opinion is rectified. This is good, but this only reaches those who are already pro-European, and we should be more proactive. And what would that entail? Well, if I can say just a few more words and maybe make a commercial of the Battery Foundation I'm working for, we are currently working on a paper that will address the European narrative in a proactive way, and that paper should be published in the next months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakub. And now Magda Wnuk, who is an analyst at Mam Prawo Wiedzieć portal 61 Association. She spent a lot of time in Brussels recently, as she told me before the meeting, so maybe you could tell us how we can reach people and politicians, so that also the politicians could reach people in a more targeted way, and so that people get more involved in European affairs, at least when it comes to elections. Okay, I will try, but if I can do that, we'll see. I'm the last speaker, so I will try to refer to the previous speakers said. Well, that's true. I represent, I have the right to know portal, and I took part in information campaign 5 years ago. We were trying to make people more aware about the European Parliament, and I spent a month in Brussels, and I had the opportunity to listen live to Juncker, his State of the Union speech, where he touched upon the issue of communication with citizens, which was a very marginal part of his speech, but at least he said that citizens are not going to trust European institutions if we are not going to talk to them about concrete things, and if we are not going to implement these things. And he gave an example of time change in member states. This was the concrete thing he wanted to talk about during his State of the Union speech. So, 4 years ago, that's how we tried to reach. Citizens. That's the way we spoke to people, and we had the impression that we were talking about important thing, although we were basing our utterances on some fundamental things as the competences of the European Parliament, who the members of the European Parliament are. For instance, we were talking about roaming, so we were telling people where it will be possible to call your friends from other member states for free. So we behaved just like Juncker. And on the one hand, this may be seen as the right way to go, and Jan also mentioned the fact that we should talk about concrete things, but I think that this is a step back from what the European Union proposed at the very beginning of the 21st century. Back then, we had the impression that we should stress the importance of European community, a pan-European idea, which also Kerry referred to. Whether that exists or not, that's a separate topic. But the project that was to be finalized by a joint constitution for the entire European Union failed. It was rejected in the countries of the so-called Old European Union, in France and the Netherlands, which were the countries, founding fathers of the European Union, and this led to the next crisis in the European Union. First, the crisis of the Eurozone, which sparked off a change of emotions towards the European Union, a very negative change. Then migration crisis, crisis in 2015, which led to a crisis in our part of Europe, because it is Poland which contributed to Europe the remembrance of solidarity, became the country which said no to solidarity at the European level, which is very sad. And my reflection is, well, we could talk about this interest that we have in being a member of the European Union. It is very easy to come up with some arguments that it is beneficial for Poland to stay in the EU. It pays off simply. That's easy to talk about. The problem arises where we are about to engage emotions of citizens, when we are about to talk about things that are something more than just financial interests. And I have doubts whether there is a common narrative. And I'm thinking, what's your attitude? Well, I can guess that most of you are pro-European. You think that the EU is okay, that we need to integrate and tighten up the cooperation. But there is a large group of citizens of the European Union whose position is totally different, and that does not mean that we either have Polexit or the European or Poland integrates more deeply, but it could also mean that they don't know what it means to be European, to feel European. They don't have the need to feel European. They just feel like Poles, and they have no reflection as to whether they should as Europeans or not. Maybe that was the reason for Brexit. Well, the only emotions that we can spark off are negative ones. It is really difficult for us to spark off some positive emotions, which is also related to this technocratic language that talks about financial interests only. But on the other hand, I believe that this is not the only reason. When I talk to people from the European People's Party or from socialists and Democrats, their language is common. They engage emotions in what they're saying. They talk about common identity, common background. And I have the impression that they really feel it. The question is whether they are unique, or whether there are people in their respective countries who could be reached by this message. Are there really people who could be reached by this message of common identity? Juncker talked a lot about this common identity, but is it really possible to involve those who sparked off the conflict concerning solidarity and democracy? Is it possible to reach them with this message saying that we should have common identity and that we should have common values? Well, I'm taking a very broad perspective because I would also like to take a step back before we get to another campaign saying how much we can earn from the European Union and how much the import of apples increased during our membership of the European Union. Well, we deal with the European Union on everyday basis. We are specialists, experts. That's why we should think about how we perceive the European Union and how we should think about how to convey this message to voters. And we should try to understand this other group who perceives Poland, who perceives the EU as somewhere that is located somewhere far away, something very distant. First, we need to understand this negative attitude. We need to understand why people voted leave, because otherwise we won't have a common narrative and we will be based on the common market and the benefits, financial issues, which is not bad. That's I'm not saying that we should not talk about financial interests at all, but I suggest that we should try to communicate with skeptical ones, because if we are to create a pan-European or European society, and if we are to implement this what Juncker talked about, this common identity, common Europe, we should find a language to talk about it. I have no idea as to how to do it. I can give you no recipe. That's just the problem I sensed during my 1 month long stay in Brussels, and I hope that we could reach some conclusions today together. Thank you. Well, we are trying to provide people with some recipes. That's not the best tool we could have, but You Vote EU is a kind of attempt to find a common language. And now I would give the floor to people gathered in the room, unless Agnieszka would like to refer to what has been said. I'm very sorry, Agnieszka, I forgot about you. I need just 3 minutes. A lot of interesting comments were made. That's why I'm going to abuse my situation. I provided you with an introduction, so now I can refer to what previous speakers said. Kerry mentioned that there is no pan-European public space. That's why a discourse is filtered by national media, and campaigns are carried out as national campaigns, traditional campaigns with gold or red cards, yellow or red cards for the ruling parties in respective countries. And this evolution that I talked about, transition from indirect to direct elections in 1979 was not completed, so to speak, because constituencies are the same as the boundaries of respective states. And this discussion is really old, and it got back at the time of Brexit, because the question was asked what to do with the vacant 79 seats of Great Britain, and one proposal was to create an experimental pan-European list of candidates. So let's vote MEPs within the member states, but additionally let's create a pan-European list which will allow us to choose additional 79 members of the European Parliament, and let's see how it works, how it functions. Maybe this will create a kind of pan-European public space. But this has not succeeded. So the 79 vacant mandates from Great Britain were just removed. We are about to select over 700 MEPs. But since the Maastricht Treaty, since the 1990s, while we are residents in other member states, we have the right to cast a vote in EP elections for candidates from those countries. And the question is, to what extent citizens in European countries, not only in Poland, are aware of this entitlement, and to what extent they use it? And to what extent political parties and organizations, citizen organizations, target their message to these people. In Poland, the number of foreigners is relatively low, although Kerry contradicts this thesis. Still, there are some British people, people from Latvia, Slovakia, and other countries present in Poland, and the question is whether they will vote for candidates from Poland or for candidates from their respective countries. In 2004, these were the first elections that I could take part in. I lived in Brussels at that time, and I cast a vote for a candidate from Brussels. But I don't know many people who did the same thing. And one more thing that Kerry mentioned, clear alternative when it comes to Brexit, or each yes or no vote. Very concrete vote. We know what we vote for, so we feel really empowered, and that's why we take part in such elections. But when it comes to parliamentary elections, and especially EP elections, this alternative is not that clear. But I would is to say that in these elections, this alternative is somewhere there, because if we have a look at Viktor Orban or Matteo Salvini and their statements, on the one hand, they talk about creating a new alliance with a very conservative view of Europe, and on the other hand, we've got ALDE, liberals, who announced an alliance. We've got Macron and Mark Rutte from the Netherlands, and the possible alliance around liberals and Democrats. And we have the impression that these are two very clear alternatives. Do we want more integration? Do we want deeper integration? Or do we strive for a radical overhaul of the European Union? Maybe not collapse of the European Union, but less integration, more sovereignty of the member states to the detriment of the European institutions. So maybe this alternative is really clearer than in the case of previous elections. Maybe this is an opportunity to involve more people in voting. This is a kind of traditional conflict, left-wing parties, right-wing parties. Because the idea of Macron is to repeat his victory in France, so to change the axis of conflict. But in the case of the EP, it's not only about changing the axis of conflict, but about establishing a new axis of conflict around which the citizens would be able to be mobilized and get involved. And the very last word, does my vote count? Well, from the perspective of Poland, there are 705 members of the European Parliament, and we are about to have members from Poland will be just 7% of all the members of the European Parliament. So we could say that the representation of Poland will not be that significant, which poses a problem. Another problem is the MEPs from Poland are not going to cooperate with one another, but even if they cooperate, 7% is really little, too little. So why should we bother to vote if we are to get just 7% of the seats in the European Parliament? And the very last thing, when we take part in parliamentary elections, national elections in Poland, we vote in order to decide who's the majority, who's the ruling majority. So we can choose less evil. We don't want our vote to get wasted, so we do not give our vote to those whom we really like, but we choose less evil. In the European Parliament, the situation is different. There is no majority. Usually there is a great coalition between the European People's Party and Socialists and Democrats, but this has not always been the case. And on top of that, very strict party discipline is not functioning that good in the European Parliament. It is functioning better in the national parliament in Poland. And after the 2019 elections, the political scene is going to be even more fragmented. There are going to be even more groups. Unfortunately, I can't hear you right now, so I'm not able to interpret. There are some technical problems, which I hope will be solved very soon. If you could ask the speaker to stop talking for a moment, because I really can't hear, so I won't be able to repeat what she said. Unfortunately, I can't hear you at all.
I dużo różnych koalicji ad hoc. Głos poszczególnych, nawet niewielkich grup posłów, czy poszczególnych posłów będzie coraz
Słuchaj,
istotniejszy.
ja będę z telefonem, powiedz mi, czy słuchać, czy nie pójdę tam, dobra?
Tym bardziej warto głosować z tych dwóch względów. Po pierwsze, one będą w dużo większym stopniu ustawione na tej linii konfliktu proeuropejski, antyeuropejski, a z drugiej strony ze względu na postępującą fragmentację sceny politycznej głos nawet kilku posłów będzie miał naprawdę duże znaczenie w procesie legislacyjnym w Parlamencie Europejskim. Dziękuję bardzo.
Agnieszko, i to było bardzo fajne głosy. Ja przynajmniej dla siebie biorę stan, że skoro spodziewałem się fragmentacji, to każdy teoretycznie może mieć szansę mieć swojego posła, jak już go umieści w parlamencie. Mamy w programie jeszcze 10 minut na tę część. Ja proponuję 5 minut przeznaczyć, jeżeli są głosy z sali, komentarze. Prosiłbym tylko taką, powiedzmy, 2-minutową dyscyplinę. Staram się wymuszać jakoś wzrokiem.
I nic nie słychać, tak?
No i zapraszam do oddamy głos.
Jest
Ja chciałam w tym temacie
nic.
mówić o Unii To jest bardzo dobry pomysł, żeby mówić między innymi o tym, że tylko razem z Unią i tylko w Unii jesteśmy w stanie się obronić przed poważnymi zagrożeniami. I tu właśnie zagrożenie na przykład ze strony Rosji wydaje mi się takim, który może zadziałać. Natomiast zawsze wtedy...
Okay, it seems I can hear you again. Okay, we had a refugee crisis and the EU was not able to defend us. So, it seems we need a reasonable solution for that kind of questions, such as why wasn't the EU able to defend us during the refugee crisis? Another problem is you said that there is going to be an opposition between whether we want to have more sovereignty or more integration. I think we should not emphasize this kind of conflict in this very region, because we are bound to have more people saying that they want more sovereignty in our region. Democracies in this region are quite new when compared to Western democracies. That's why people are bound to say we want more sovereignty. Democracy is something very new to us. We want to have more decision-making power. That's just my idea. I do not back what I'm saying on any hard data. But I think that in the context of Poland, an argument that could work is what follows. Thanks to the European Union, for the past 75 years, there has been peace in Poland. And I also think that we should refer to our common Christian roots, the roots of Christian Europe, common European history. This is what we should mention in order to involve people in EP elections and in integration idea in general. 2 or 3 more voices from you. Szymon Drawczyk, good morning. I think that you did not mention one element which is crucial when it comes to increasing voter turnout and in general involvement of citizens in politics. You didn't mention Spitzenkandidaten, frontrunners. Appointing top candidates from all the groups of the European Parliament and indicating them as future presidents of the European Commission. it might be claimed that this could trigger more interest in European elections, similarly to presidential elections, which usually have higher voter turnout rates than parliamentary elections. Well, I have maybe strange remarks concerning the fact that we are a Christian country and the pro-European narrative does not mention the fact that the European Union is based on Christian roots, on Christian brotherhood. I think that these aspects should be mentioned. I don't know whether these aspects have been mentioned anywhere, but I'm sure that they have not been mentioned when talking about issues that are positive when it comes to the European Union. Any other voices, any other questions from the room? If not, let's now refer to what's been said. I'm wondering whether it would not be possible to use the deficits of the current system, maybe this fragmentarization, which seems very likely after the next elections, or maybe the fact that members of the European Parliament seem to be delegates of the national systems that would prefer to stay home and make politics there, but they go to Brussels and in fact they're full of ideas what they could do, what they could change. Maybe we should try to convince the members of the European Parliament to try to involve people more in politics. How to reach MEPs in the run-up to the elections and also after the elections. The order of speaking is up to you.
So let me refer shortly to what has been mentioned in the questions from all the sides. I would like to support one idea mentioned by Professor as regards a shift in the division which can be observed in the population, and there is research of the Battery Foundation by Professor Konieczny, and this shows that in 2008 the trust towards the European Union was dependent on the general trust to the institutions. Now this is different, because the trust to towards the European Union is dependent on the support of the national government, tolerance, and the approach to the church, and the general attitude to democracy. Second, as regards the message we want to convey, I think there is no single message that will be correct. We need to understand that there are many people who are in between, who do not have a clear mindset as to whether they support the European Union or are against it. And the research I've read shows that there are differences regarding collective and individual benefits of the membership of the European Union. There are some people who can be convinced to support the European Union when you give them very information on very individual benefits of the membership of the European Union, like the amount of export of apples as regards about the agriculture, for example, or roaming, which is free of charge right now. But there are other people who do not buy these arguments. They think that collective benefits are more important, and they feel that the European Union is a general threat to their sovereignty, for example, the sovereignty of their country, for example. And those people will not be convinced by arguments that refer to individual benefits. They focus on collective benefits of the country. And also, let me say a few words about how we define sovereignty. The sovereignty can be defined in different ways. We can have a formalistic approach that says we will not be told what to do, and this is our sovereignty. But another way of defining it would be to say that the sovereignty gives us the possibility of solving our problems in our own way. And if you go to a bookshop in Poland, you'll find just one book on the Eurozone. And this is a book about how to dissolve the Eurozone. If you go to a bookstore in Berlin, you will have a great number of books about the Eurozone, and there will be very different opinions expressed in these books. There are books which support the Eurozone, and there are books which are against it. In Poland, this is not the case. 25% of Polish people think that we should join the Eurozone, which is still a very good result given this political narrative. And there are hardly any political parties that would talk about how Poland could benefit from joining the Eurozone. And now the refugee crisis, this is of course a very complex issue. And in my opinion, this migration crisis shows what happens when we do not take common actions in Europe, when we are being egoistic and selfish. We have groups of refugees that come to a certain country, and this is something that started many years ago, and that was ignored for years. Greece, Italy highlighted these problems, but no reaction followed. And now we've got the Dublin II regulation, and there was no system of relocating those refugees that would work, and we had no effective system of protecting our borders. There was no pan-European solution that would focus on humanitarian values which are binding for all the member states, but at the same time giving the people a feeling that the law was not being infringed, and there was some stability and order as regards dealing with the refugee crisis. Okay, so many aspects have been addressed. Let me address just two of them, because we do not have that much time. I would like to refer to what the moderator said. And this is a very broad aspect, a very broad question. How should we create an agenda for the members of the European Parliament to make the members of the European Parliament feel that they can do something good for their people who voted for them, and also how it is possible to coordinate the European policies on different levels. This is, of course, a question about how people are able to lobby, to talk to the members of the European Parliament and what is important for them and what is not. But the more general question would be how it is possible for the Polish authorities to make use of the presence of the Polish members of the European Parliament. Do they have any impact, and how can we use their presence in the European Parliament? And how can we communicate the benefits of their presence in the European Parliament to the people? This is a very broad aspect, a very broad question. The cooperation with the members of the European Parliament, this is one thing. We can try to promote the Polish interest in the European Parliament, but this is a weakness right now, because this is not really happening. We are not successful. The members of the European Parliament from Poland are not successful promoting the Polish interest in the European Parliament as compared to countries such as Spain or Sweden. And the Swedish government, the Spanish governments are able to cooperate with their members of the European Parliament. The Polish government is not able to do so. And now the question of sovereignty and the division in the population, I would not say that we need to control that division and set it within certain boundaries. This is something that is happening, and we need to follow that development. It is a shift that is taking place. It has been described by scientists for years. There is a book by Hans-Peter Krisi that works for the European Institute in Florence in Italy, and he wrote a book about political conflicts in Europe in 2012, and that was the moment when he started showing that the main division regarding the political conflict is shifting, and this is something that was observed later when the migration crisis came in 2015. That was the moment when we started seeing it in Poland, but it had been already observed before in the Western member states of the European Union, and this is something we need to face as a challenge. And I would not say that this is only a threat, because politics is an area in which a conflict is something normal. We've been used to seeing politics as something being very technocratic. When we have conflicts regarding the transport policies, if we should focus on cycling more or maybe on car users. But this is like a small dispute. This is not a major conflict. But politics is about major conflicts. I think this is part of the definition of politics, that it involves major conflicts. And if we want people to identify with particular political forces, we need to make them emotional. And if we want those people to get emotional, this entails exclusivity, unfortunately. This does not need to be something negative, because we do not need to say that sovereignty is bad as such, for example. Instead, we might stress that a sovereignty could lead to isolation, to closeness, and this is something many voters would not like, even though they like the idea of sovereignty as such. If we show them that sovereignty might lead to isolation, this might convince them to support the European Union. But again, this is about being exclusive, not about being inclusive, because if we focus on being inclusive all the time, this will lead us to have the situation as it is right now. There are no clear choices for the people, and if they see that they don't have many choices, they don't get involved and they don't vote. And you're not speaking into the mic. We can't hear you. The interpreters can't hear you. You're not speaking into the microphone. Please use a microphone. Otherwise we can't hear you.
Dokładnie taką miałam refleksję, że być może jest tak, że ta druga strona, bo w tym momencie tak jak dalej tego się będę trzymać, tylko ta strona bardziej stawiająca na Polskę i suwerenność i interes Polski w Unii Europejskiej, czyli ta strona obecnie związana z PiS-em, potrafi jakieś emocje w ludziach wzbudzić, a ta druga strona, która również jest bardzo ekskluzywna,
profits from the presence in the European Union. Well, they are mostly linked to the Law and Justice Party, and it's easy for them to evoke emotions. But it's difficult for those on the other side, those who refer to this common interests, common origins, common background. Well, it is very difficult for them to invoke some emotions, and I think that Guy Verhofstadt showed some wishful thinking. Well, there is no joint definition. No one knows what some notions mean. Democracy, rule of law, there is a range of beautiful round notions, but no one really knows what they mean. And the meaning of them is imposed from the top. And now I would like to refer to what I've talked about with the MEPs whom I talked to during my stay in Brussels. I asked them whether they feel as those who work in order to convey to ordinary people in Poland what's going on in Brussels, whether they feel as kind of transmitters. And it seems to me that their answers were positive. They said they do feel like transmitters. And I think that Polish delegation is quite strong in the European Parliament. But unfortunately, they do not get back to their regions in Poland, and they do not try to explain to ordinary people there what Brussels is all about. But of course, coming back to Poland and explaining to ordinary people what Brussels is about requires different kinds of abilities and skills than the ones required when you sit in Brussels. So maybe that's the reason. Maybe we should support members of the European Parliament, because it's really difficult to talk to ordinary people in Poland and to convince them that the European Union is important. And now, Kerry.
Question correctly about the idea of Christian values, Christian legacies, Christian heritage as being core to the European mission. And it's a diverse but joint history, of course, but I'd challenge the idea that reinserting or championing or highlighting Christian values as core to EU would help. I think it would be incredibly divisive rather than it might work in Poland, but it's certainly not going to work in countries like my country, which are inherently functioning multicultural states, like many other European states as well. So I just don't follow the logic that reinserting or inserting Christianity will help. I think it will be a hindrance. I think it'd be a very unhelpful hindrance on the internal coherency of the European Union, but just as importantly, on the European Union's projection on the world stage. The notion of having some kind of Christian mission is backwards facing, in my view. And I'll leave it on that point.
Bardzo Państwu dziękuję, bardzo dziękuję panelistom. Teraz myślę, że tak, oklaski.
I would like to extend my thanks to the panelists and also to Professor who's not present here, but maybe she'll watch a video. This part of the seminar is over. And now we would like to present you with one of the tools that could be used to mobilize voters, but also after the vote is over to reach parliamentary members of the European Parliament. I hope this tool will be inspiring to you. And now voice over to Priscilla.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank Collegium for inviting me over to present this platform. And I also must thank the panelists of the earlier panel, because it's been incredibly interesting. For me, I'm coming from the south of Europe, which is Italy, so I also have a local perspective on things, but I found this conversation extremely rich, and so thank you for the panelists earlier. I just want to be very brief, and my presentation will be followed by my colleague Marek from Collegium Civitas, who will dig a little bit deeper into the platform we are presenting today. But I'm glad that on the conversation earlier, the panelists also touched upon values and emotions that the European Union might get to us, because in fact we also think that the big gap that there is between citizens and European institutions has to do with the fact that we are not talking anymore about topics, about issues, but very much about red tape, bureaucracy, paperwork that takes place in Brussels. So we also hope that with this project, we are going back to talk about issues that matters to us, that we care about, and topics which are very much more important than processes and paperwork that obviously Brussels needs to put in place in order to make those issues real. You want to go to the... no, just 1 second. Okay. So yeah, basically what we are doing today is we are launching this platform, which basically this project, this website is one of the outcomes of a wider project that is being co-funded by the European Commission. We are a consortium of 5 European-based NGOs, namely, the NGO I work for, which is called Riparte il Futuro and is based in Italy. Then we have Collegium Collegium Civitas in Poland, a Greek NGO, Vuli Watch, whose translation stands for like Parliament Watch in Greece, and 2 Brussels-based organizations, Vote Watch, which is also represented here, so we have 2 people from Vote Watch you might want to also turn questions to later, and Adorban Davide, hi, and ECAS, also European Citizen Action Service, also based in Brussels. So it's 5 of us, and this is the third event we are launching the project. The first one was in Brussels on September 25th. The second one was in Athens a few days ago. So it's been quite nice for me that I go traveling all throughout Europe, in a way. Thank you, yeah. So why this project? I just wanted to be a little bit provocative here because someone said earlier that also Poland is a relatively new democracy. Other members of the European Union were born in democracies. But is democracy the best way? Well, allegedly Winston Churchill was wondering the same, and he said that it's the worst form of government, except for all others. We don't know any other better than democracy, which means let's try and make democracy work. Although this might not be the best one, and maybe few of the outcomes of democracies nowadays have showed us it might not be the best. We have mentioned Brexit a few times earlier, but that's also an outcome of democracy. So our project focuses on democracy and of the use of internet. And obviously the question is also internet the best way to conceive, to channel information and being used as an empowerment tool for citizens? Well, we don't know, but surely there is any other. At the moment, internet is indeed considered as the most mainstream, although the speaker earlier was saying that when it comes to European Union matters, the Polish people get their news mainly from TV than on the internet. But of course, if we think about the wider European territory, we know that internet has played a key role in the last processes, the democratic processes we've been seeing. Brexit is one of them. We had elections in my country a few months ago, and internet played a key role too. So of course we need, Of course we need to make the best we can out of these tools we are given, internet and democratic processes. What we might need is to have clear rules that governs these 2 environments, the democratic political space and the digital information space. We need clear rules. Otherwise, the tools can be exploited by people with different means, and we well know this. So, of course, we also need money for make these things happening, and that's why we asked the European Union to give us money in order to implement a project which has 3 main aims. The aims are to connect European shareholders in elections, being candidates to elections, our future policymakers, the people, but also civil society organizations, because they are represented collective values, they represent collective interests, so they are the best advocates for the social good. And I'm not saying this because I'm working for one of them, but because I really believe this is the case. Share is another aim of the website, meaning that we want these opinions and emotions to be shared in between all of these stakeholders, and then allowed people to an informed voting, and I'll get to this soon. So basically, these aims are to bridge the gap between citizens and current MEPs and candidates to the next elections, because everyone can say here that a gap does exist. I mean, I think it's fairly fair to say this. But also bring into discussion the vital role of civil society organizations, which in many countries of the European Union, many member states, their actions is not well understood. But they are a great channel for a very solid information and data provision, data supply. So that's why we also think that oftentimes citizens forget the vital role CSOs have, although they should trust them more and maybe go to them a little bit more to see if there is anything they can get out of the data that the CSOs share. So we will get into the website soon with Marek, but basically the website provides for every current MEPs, candidates to the elections, and European-based civil society organization to set up a profile. In this profile, they can post the policy proposals they might want to put forward for the next elections, or that they generally think are themes worth discussing within the European discussion. And so this is what the profile can do. So you set up a profile, you post your policy proposals, but also we basically in the website there is also a quiz which is based on the top 25 issues which European Parliament has discussed in this current legislature. And when you set up your profile, you will be asked, you as a candidate or an NGO, you will be asked to vote on these proposals. So at least. So these 25 issues have been grouped up based on objective criteria. So we are not imposing any choice. We are not steering these topics in any ways, but they come from numbers basically that have been discussed in the European Parliament. And why we want these CSOs or candidates to vote on that? Because we want to show to citizens in the first place what is the position of this stakeholder. Why? Because we are providing a very independent, transparent, third-party website, which is less auto-referential, self-referential than any website that a CSO or a candidate can have themselves, and maybe changing their opinion as the opinion of the people gets into shape. So the fact that we are asking these questions on our website, they will stay there, and these hold accountable all the shareholders that we have discussed. So basically, by the fact that we're providing this quiz and we're asking candidates and NGOs to post policy proposals, the ultimate goal is to allow citizens to an informed voting, not just on people, but also on issues. And people, users, they will be able to vote on the policy proposals that have been published by the other stakeholders, and they will be able to play the quiz so that they also will get a sense of what are the candidates that best, and political parties and political groups within the EP which best represents their own views. Sometimes we think we have some opinions, but we don't know if there is a political party or person that actually can think the same and can represent this to the EP. Thanks to the quiz, we will have this opportunity. I just want to mention shortly that outside of this room there are 2 or 3 maybe three iPad stations that are already wired to get to the quiz, so you can play the quiz also today, and this will be great for us to have feedbacks on how the quiz works, but also for you to understand what's the current political party, political group, and a current MEP which best represent your views. You will have the result will give you the local representative you're mostly close to, and the European representative, not even from your own country, which you might be most close to. And we think this is one of the most engaging functionalities of the website. This is why we're providing these iPads there. So please play the quiz. And also, if any of you here represents an NGO or a think tank, as I certainly know some of you are, I invite you to register, sign up to the platform, and start publish your own policy proposals to get into conversation. Of course, the website will help disseminating those policy proposals all throughout Europe, and I'll tell you why, how in a second. So I encourage you all to sign up your organization to this our website. The URL is yourvotematters.eu. You have this everywhere, so just please do it. We can go on the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we are aiming for, connect, share and vote. What does this mean? This means an effective participation of every European stakeholders, citizens and CSOs and possibly MEPs, which are representing us, to the European discourse, to the European narrative. This is why I was talking about this independence website we have, which hold players more accountable than their own page. We can change, shifting according to how massive political opinions shift. The platform is multilingual. We have it in, actually we initially had it in 7 languages, but then the Swedes Youth Council voluntarily decided to partner with our project, providing the Swedish version of this project. So we also have this in Swedish. Having in the people's language is of course something that we have done in order to engage, foster their participation, beside the fact that English might not be the official language of the European Union soon, but that's a joke. Of course, we want people to learn by doing, because we don't want to dictate anything from the top. So that's why we have provided for this interactive tool, which is the quiz, which you find on the website. But you will also find in the communication and the dissemination activity, which we'll be implementing and put in place in the following month, other interactive tools. An additional quiz, which you will be finding running on Facebook, which is a preliminary to the quiz you will be having on the website. Multi-language infographics on some data of European voters' expectations, and this will be published in the next month. So keep an eye on that. Stay tuned. And also we are providing some friendly short videos dedicated to the shareholders which are part of this, so users, NGOs and MEPs. As in the mainstream communication, we still know that videos are the best channels in order to convey information. I also wanted to put the fact that we are having a communication and media plan. Why? Because oftentimes, I don't know how many of you work for NGOs, but oftentimes in these social change projects, we spend all of our money to create the tools, and nothing is left for communicating and disseminating those tools. So we create fantastic website, fantastic tools, and no one knows about them, and no one uses them. So when we applied for money for this project, we wanted to make sure that there was enough budget for having this project properly disseminated all over Europe as much as we can. Because that's equally important. This is just a hint for everyone who's applying for projects. Like, let's not apply just for production money, but for dissemination money too. That's very important. Of course, the website will have a blog. Also, we are hosting blog posts. So if anyone wants to write on this blog, just please let Kasia know, and we can try and see if this can happen. And I'm happy to say that for the time being, although we've launched this website just 3 weeks ago, we have already concluded some partnerships with quite important information multipliers, which is equally important for us to get this project out there. Politico.eu, the EU Observer and Euractiv will be active pretty soon. ANSA Europe, which is the Italian Reuters, I would say. And with this last information multiplier, we want to get a little bit outside the Brussels bubble, because of course the other 3 media outlets are very much within the Brussels bubble. Yeah, I think it's all for now. If you want to go to the next slide, I will just share some numbers. We have some very important numbers. We want 100 non-profit registers at least, and several millions of Europeans involved and reached out. That's it. You can go to the first. yeah, I mean, I'm done. I just wanted to say that we have many million people that we want to reach out with this platform in order to encourage the voters' turnout, as someone has said before, but also allow for an informed voting on issues that are transnational, that matters at the European level rather than the local level, because for that we have national elections. But please, Marek, thank you. Off to Marek now.
Po tym wyczerpującej opowieści na temat tej platformy, którą zaprezentowała nam Priscilla, zostaje mi w zasadzie tylko niemalże, tak trochę żartując, pokazać Państwu pierwszą stronę i wszystko zostało powiedziane. Ale chciałbym zwrócić uwagę, zanim jeszcze tylko pokażę 2 czy 3 najważniejsze funkcjonalności, na jedną ważną rzecz, czyli mamy narzędzie do przekazywania informacji, narzędzie zbudowane w internecie, platformę internetową i to, co jest kluczowe i o co tak naprawdę też chcielibyśmy Państwa prosić, o 2 rzeczy. Z jednej strony o to, żeby popularyzować to narzędzie.
We would like to ask you to share this tool with as many people as you can, for instance, using social media. So please popularize this tool as much as possible. But what's also important is credibility. We all know that communication, digital communication, faces problems with the credibility. We all live in our own information bubbles. And if we want this project to succeed, we must go beyond these communication bubbles. We need to provide information from as many political perspectives as possible. Priscilla talked about NGOs that could be helpful here, that could become an element of this platform, not only the user of this platform, but also a part of this platform. They could also gain information on political groups or candidates and provide this information for the platform, but they could also show their own ideas as to how to solve the problems affecting all the citizens of the European Union. And its very tool, thanks to its scale of communication, could make this easier. Could share these ideas with so many other people. Okay, now let me present the platform. I hope it will function well. Website has already been uploaded, so you can open it on your smartphones, tablets, or computers. There are 3 info points here where you can test the platform. The most important thing you can find here is adjust your voice, and maybe one more thing, adjust your voice. This platform is based on 25 problems that have already been debated in the European Parliament. And I think that each of us should start by doing the quiz that is presented at the very beginning. So you should take a stance on these 25 problems, because this will show you what party, what group you should support. You need to register by giving your age and sex. This will be used for statistical reasons later on. I will show you some functionalities. For instance, should the European Union introduce more rigorous regulations concerning privacy in digital communication? And you have 3 options. You can vote for, you can vote against, or you can abstain. And then you can decide how important that question is for you. So you can decide to what extent this question matters for you particularly.
do bazy danych. Pytań mamy 25.
So, as mentioned, there are 25 questions and they might seem distant sometimes, but on the other hand,
Największy brak informacyjny, luka informacyjna polega na tym, że
the widest information gap relies in the fact that we, as voters, cannot see the actual problems. We don't know what these people talk about, what these people touch upon. So, if these questions seem too distant to you, then you've got some arguments in favor and against particular solutions gathered under, somewhere below on the page. And you've got a detailed description of the very particular vote concerning this particular problem held at the European Parliament. You've got the entire procedure described for all the 25 problems. So our first important task that we need to fulfill is to vote over 25 important aspects. And please remember that you might decide how important each of these questions is for you. Of course, I'm not going to vote over these issues right now. Just remember that there are 25 issues, and when the vote is over, there is one more important screen. You can check whether you haven't done any mistake, whether you haven't changed your mind, so you can approve, and you get a result. As a result, following this procedure, you might see how particular MEPs voted compared to your votes. So you can check, in other words, you can check which of MEPs have a similar way of thinking to your own. You can see the result here, of course, on the pages that I'm going to show you. Our voting will not be visible because I haven't completed the voting, but once you go through all the 25 questions, you will get the result, and you will see, for instance, you agree with this particular MEP to 79%. You agree with this MEP to 50%. You might select Polish MEPs only to check how they voted and to what extent your choices coincide with what they decided. You might group MEPs according to the groups, fractions, different kinds of variables. So you've got a documented list of decisions taken by all the parliamentarians in 25 important issues. You've got your own votes, so you can compare the results, and in the upcoming results, the candidates to the European Parliament will have the opportunity to fill in the test themselves, so that you will be able to see which member of the European Parliament thinks just as you do. So, in very simple terms, who you should cast your vote for. And let me repeat once again, we are dealing with real problems and real solutions. There are no questions as to whether we should promote integration or not. These are real questions that were asked to MEPs. Another important aspect is that when we are a member of an NGO, we are able to register our organization on the platform, put forward certain solutions, and get involved in the entire procedure. We could get assessed by other people using the platform, and
wśród wszystkich uczestników tej platformy. Widzieliście
make our position more visible. We are going to reach a couple of million people all around Europe, which is really a huge room for giving voice to our positions if we are NGOs. One more thing that's worth mentioning. After filling in the questionnaire, you can see the following functionalities, and you're able to project what the European Parliament will look like after the elections. And you can see what the decisions of the European Parliament upon those 25 vital issues would be. So you could think, if we vote for this and that party, this and that group, parliamentary fraction, this will mean this and that for the European Parliament and for the decisions taken by the European Parliament. You can also find some news on the web page from the European perspective, or from the Polish perspective only, social media. That's never enough of social media. It's possible to popularize a platform via social media. And one more important factor that I've already mentioned at the very beginning, if we want this project to succeed, it needs to be popular and it needs to be credible. And credible, to a high extent, depends on what content we upload on the platform, and to what extent this platform becomes a voice of Polish non-governmental organizations in this European debate. Thank you.
Ja myślę, że w takim razie teraz jest czas na pytania.
I think it's time for questions from you, if you have any.
Organizatorów.
If you have any questions to the organizers, to the panelists, we still have 5 minutes time. Any questions regarding the platform itself? The platform can't take the floor, but there are representatives of the platform who are eager to explain any doubts to you. We can't hear the questions that are not asked into the mic. The mic is off, so we can't hear the question. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I wanted to ask,
wiele nieobecności na głosowaniach albo pomyłki w głosowaniach. Jak państwo sobie z tym poradzili? Bo mamy europosła, ale on nie był na tym.
There are many absences. There are many situations in which an MEP does not vote because he or she is not present, for example, or refrains from voting. What happens in that situation? Well, this is also indicated on our website. This is, of course, crucial if we want to check whether a particular MEP takes views which are similar to my own, but this is of course something that also takes into considerations the votings in which that particular member of the European Parliament did not participate. Any other questions? It's not working again? It's off. Okay, this one is on. I have the following question. Are you planning to create questions yourselves? Because these questions are based on votings that took place in the past, but in 6 months, for example, totally different issues could be relevant for the European Union because the situation is very dynamic. So are you planning to add new questions, new issues, reacting to what is happening?
Sorry, I was waiting for the translation to finish. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So basically, we want to be as much objective as we can, because we are just channels. We are a means of communication. We, in any way, want to be ourselves as the one that actually is making policy. We're just allowing and empowering political conversation take place. So we chose these questions based on the last activity of EP, as you rightly pointing out. And when it comes to the future, we hope that the policy proposals which will be published and shared and voted upon by the platform users will shape the discussion in the future. So we are hoping for these NGOs and MEPs to publish these proposals so that the discussion will be owned by the very people that use the platform, if that makes sense. Did I reply to you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Może jakieś jeszcze pytania techniczne? Zawsze do platformy to mamy techniczne pytania.
Maybe technical questions. There are always technical questions when a platform, a website is being discussed. And we might, of course, keep talking about the future of the European Union. But if you have no further questions right now, I would like to thank you all for having participated in the debate. Thank you for being here. Thanks a lot. And I would also want to extend my thanks to the leader and the moderator. Thank you all for being here. And now I hope that you will visit the website and take part in the quiz. Well, you can use this digital equipment we have right now. You can use that equipment to take the quiz straight away. So you are very much encouraged to do so. And you can give us likes, of course. And you can use your own mobile devices and laptops. The quiz will work on them as well. And please promote our tool among young people, because in Poland, the voter turn-up among young people is very, very low as compared to other European countries. So it would be crucial to spread that information among young people that such a tool has been launched and that they can benefit from it. And we can now invite you to lunch. Thank you very much.